Welcome everybody who's come online. We're really sorry to have kept you waiting. We have about half the people that we're expecting have joined the Zoom so far. So we were just trying to give a little bit of time to allow for a few more people to join us. But I do note the time, so I thought we better get started. Thanks to everybody who's on mute already and who have their cameras off. It's probably a good idea just in case anybody does have some streaming issues. Feel free before we get started to maybe just pop a hello comment in the chat. Let us know who you are, maybe where you're from and where you are around the country as well. It's always nice to know. I'm hoping you can all hear me because nobody's popped anything in the chat yet.
We can hear you.
Lovely. There we go. Thanks, Mark. Oh, here you go. Everybody's awake after all. Nice. Well, we're close to, might just give them a couple more minutes and we'll kick off at 10 past if that's okay, because we are still expecting quite a few more. Actually, that might be a bit too long for us all to wait. I might just start with the introductions because I think anybody who joins late is mainly joining for Janet, not for my introduction anyway. So welcome to this webinar about digital twins and smart cities, towns and regions, which is presented by Janet McPaul. Janet's the Country Director for NZ at Smart Cities Council. This webinar has been organised by the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia, NZ. I'm Jodie O'Doherty, Business Relationships Manager. Emily Liddell, who is our Member Engagement Manager, has set this up with Janet. Unfortunately, she's a little bit unwell and has lost the most of her voice, so I will be facilitating this morning. We're really pleased to be able to bring you this presentation in such a timely, relevant topic, which is the last of our leadership webinars series for 2021. Before we kick off, I'll do a little intro on IPWEA NZ, and then we'll meet our presenter. I've already done basic webinar housekeeping, which is on mute and videos off, but please feel free to pop your video on if you do wish to ask a question. And questions are welcome throughout the presentation, or feel free to hold off till the end. We hope to have about 10 minutes at the end for a quick Q&A. And a little bit about IPWEA NZ. So as you all should be aware, we're a membership-based organisation for asset management professionals. We connect a network of thousands of public works engineers across New Zealand. We offer professional development training through courses, networking conferences, forums, as well as online communities to network through. Our training is now well beyond the NZ shores, and we're into probably 12 to 15 countries with our digital online training. I'm not the only one losing my voice today, excuse me. IPWEA NZ, being a member, offers many member benefits such as discounts, NZ-based training, discounts off events and training, events, webinars, networking, special interest groups, and we lobby for you and represent our members and the industry. Industry recognition and awards, and we have the Ask Your Mates forum. Check that out if you haven't been in there. A little bit about Janet. Janet is an Australian-born Punjabi, a mother of 3 based in the Waikato. She's a CPA and former CIO with the Masters in Digital Business, in Digital Business, and is actively engaged in the New Zealand technology ecosystem, with a focus on leveraging technology in innovative ways to benefit individuals, organisations and communities. Janet is a director, NZ, at Smart Cities Council Australia, NZ, as I mentioned earlier. Janet's initial career, spanning over 10 years, was in the financial services industry, leading mid to large scale technology adoption initiatives, including with the team that released New Zealand's first online orientation origination system for vehicle finance. Following that period of her life, Janet spent more than a decade in vocational education sector, designing and developing programs and course material, teaching and coordinating several collaborative projects and applied research initiatives involving students, staff, and the wider community. More recently, Janet has been involved with supporting digital inclusion and enablement initiatives, including the Smart Cities Advisor at Hamilton City Council, tech sector lead at Tiwaka Waikato Regional Economic Development Agency, coordinating the development of the Digital Waikato 2025 strategy and delivering several large events and initiatives, bringing together small business, schools, tertiary providers, the technology sector, and the general public. I did have quite a few slides there, but I'm not moving. Here we are. Sorry about that. So I'm going to flick over and allow Janet to share her screen, and we can move into the presentation.
Great. Hopefully everybody has a screen, has the home, what do you call it, landing slide there.
You can see your slide.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and well done on actually just being able to have 5 minutes to read it before today, because Emily's been unwell, so really cool. Just quickly, if anybody's really keen to find out about all those other things that I was doing and doing, yeah, let me know. But yeah, as mentioned, I'm the country director for New Zealand for Smart Cities Council ANZ. I'm also the associate director at the Artificial Intelligence Institute at the University of Waikato, just an FYI in terms of full disclosure. And so we've got quite a bit to get through today, just to let you know. And I've just been asked to talk about digital twin as it relates to smart cities, towns and regions, but I thought it would also be useful to firstly take you through a little bit about and I'll be as quick as I can, who Smart Cities Council is. So we've been around for a number of years. We actually celebrated 5 years in New Zealand this year with an event in Christchurch with Christchurch City Council and Aurecon, and celebrating Aurecon as our first member for Australia and New Zealand. And our job and our sort of whole focus is around, and underpinned by the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is around livable, workable, sustainable cities. In terms of the smart city space, if you're keen to find out more, I suggest you go to digitaltwinhub.org, and that's where our hub is, where you'll see digital, and I'll mention some of this as we sort of progress, as the Digital Twin TV and some of our resources, the challenge that's going on, and events that are on and have been in the past, how to access content, including for Digital Twin Week, which just finished from 18th to 22nd of October. And also how you can be involved. So have a look at that if you're at all interested. So in terms of the digital twin, there are loads of definitions out there, and it's not this new thing that's just sort of popped out of nowhere. And so often people talk about it being a digital version of something that's physical. And so I've seen it as an oven, I've seen it as a whole city, I've seen it as a data representation in the environmental data space as well. And so when we talk about digital twin at Smart Cities Council, this is what we talk about. And so today I'm really keen to just sort of shed the light on some of the applications of digital twin in the smart cities, towns and regions space, and hopefully highlight the fact that we're really underselling this whole concept of digital twin if we just think about it as a replica, a digital replica of something physical. This is what we talk about. The digital twin is a capability. So there's a connection between the digital replica and the physical world, absolutely. And so there's things change. So in the physical world, they also change in the digital replica. So it's more than just a representation. It's actually it's a connection. Using obviously, you know, a telco network or similar with that movement of data. The next, and it doesn't necessarily, this is not designed to actually be in order. So you don't sort of follow this diagram in any sort of order. It just means these are the components of this concept of a digital twin as a capability. So integration, the digital twin ingests data and actually can also connect to data. So it doesn't necessarily have to ingest data, hold data, store data. It can actually just connect through, and the real focus there is on a federated data system, so we can ensure that our requirements and specific requirements for different groups are intact around the sharing of data and who has access to it and for how long, and for what purpose. And then there's this ability for the data to work together, the ability for it to be interoperable, so data interoperability. Often we talk about device interoperability, but data interoperability, and then that word standards that everybody loves to talk about. The analysis function is looking at what we've got, maybe cleaning it up, ensuring that it is what we want, verifying it yet again, extrapolating it out if we need through models and analytics, so advanced analytics and modeling, and then that all coming together to create information and insights for the different stakeholder groups. The simulation is a way of running scenarios through your digital version and having a look at sort of what might happen in this case, what might happen if this happens, and using that again to sort of inform decision making, and also as an evidence base if that's sort of the way you want to go. The visualization component, which loads of entities focus on first, and they sort of get stuck in that rut of we've got a lot of data, we've got to visualize it, bang, we've got a digital twin, and lost the whole part about why did we want one and what purpose was it serving. And even as a proof of concept, it's not probably a good idea to just go down that route and go, we've got a lot of data, let's visualize it. But it is a key component of the digital twin, and so what we're talking about is visualizing data that's there, that's ingested, that's created by the twin through the analytics, and then other data that's connected as well. And then thinking about the visualization from the perspective of the different stakeholder groups. Not everybody engages with information in the same way or has the ability to, in terms of capability in general, but also in terms of access. So keeping that in mind. And then you want to think about optimization. And so what do you actually do with this thing? There has to be a what do you do with it? And so that's about optimizing decisions. It might be around just optimizing the solution itself, so making sure that it runs efficiently, and then don't forget about the maintenance and management of something like this. It's not designed to be a point in time solution. It's meant to be sustainable. And also just FYI, if it's just going to be like 100 miles an hour, but have a look at the website, smartcitiescouncil.com, and you'll be able to find access to all the different things that we do, including to the Digital Twin Hub, if you didn't get that website address off the first page. So the who is everyone. So the who really needs to grow from what we currently think of it as something that supports operations, or something that supports one of the teams, or something that, is just for our a group of external stakeholders. We really need to be thinking about a data capability for all. So it's a real data play, and it's a data play for all, and we need to be thinking that broad. Our goal as Smart Cities Council Australia and New Zealand is to build a thriving digital twin marketplace in Australia and New Zealand. Simple as that. A lot of what we do is actually modelled on Digital Built Britain and what they're doing there. We've got some close relationships there, and also with what's going on obviously in Australia in terms of New Zealand's relationship, but obviously in North America as well, and Singapore and Southeast Asia and India, as I said. So we've got offices all around the world. So the ability to pull that knowledge and what people have done and haven't done, and lessons learned together to produce a solution here. So our work to date then, so first thing we did was, so this was in, so the hub was actually launched as part of the Centre for Data Leadership in 2020. So it's relatively new, but this is what we've managed to do since then. So we've released a guidance note, and again, all of this is on the digitaltwinhub.org, or you can get to it from smartcitiescouncil.com. But released a guidance note. The task force was an interesting one. So the task force kicked off at the end of 2019 and worked over a number of months with hundreds of people involved and hundreds of organizations involved to develop out to first come up with a blueprint. So what is it's actually quite a big Google Doc that actually pulls together all the insights and knowledge sharing that came out of that task force. But what it actually then delivered was a draft blueprint for an Australia-New Zealand digital twin strategy. We released that through the hub and at the New Zealand Digital Twin Summit that we hosted in July in Wellington. And then at the same time, we also, and so that was out for consultation. And so we're just pulling that all back in again now and looking through what came back. And we're kicking off this process of developing out a digital twin strategy for Australia and New Zealand. And so, splitting out the New Zealand from Australia. The other thing was Digital Twin Week, as I mentioned, we recently ran that. And so that's that building of community and bringing together community. But outside the events and the resources, we also provide and obviously the task force was a large part of this, but there's also the Digital Twin Collaborative, which is an opportunity to join a number of conversations as they build out in terms of digital twin and you know, to also, as much as gain insights, but it's actually to contribute your own input as well to a wide pool of stakeholders. So have a look at that. And then in July, we also kicked off the Digital Twin Challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now, as it may be of interest to a number of you to just know that it's actually going on and to be able to follow. But the summit was the other interesting, I guess, piece from this year. So we didn't run it, but Wellington City Council ran a version of a New Zealand Digital Twin Summit in 2019. And then we didn't do anything for 2020. And then we had one in Wellington, as I said, in July. And so we covered the Digital Twin State of the Nation, you know, what emerging digital twin capability was there. And so we made sure that there was a representation, not just from councils, but from other sort of I guess, central government organisations, but also the private sector, and academia, in fact, was actually front and centre talking about the work that they're doing in the digital twin space. As I mentioned, we launched the digital twin strategy blueprint as well. We talked about the future and what that means and ran 3 deep dive workshops in the afternoon around policy, the commons and the enablers. And yeah, it was a great day had by all, huge turnout. I think we had like close to about 90 people at Te Papa, so it's fantastic, and we'll be looking to do that again in 2021. Actually, it's on the calendar and already booked in. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly as well. So the Digital Twin Challenge, this is something new that we kicked off this year, and so what it is it's brought together, you had to actually apply to be part of the challenge, but it's going to run over 18 months, and what we're taking the group through, or the cohort we're calling it, is through opportunities to network and to share knowledge. We engage with other stakeholders and bring groups together around policy and practice. We're supporting the development of projects, and altogether it will actually advance this idea of a marketplace, a thriving marketplace. So in terms of what's next for 2022, there's quite a lot of activity this year, but obviously 2022 continues, and so we've got a forum running in March, hopefully in person. We'll have an international exchange in April. We'll have project reports being presented in June, and then we'll be launching the final challenge project outputs in October at Digital Twin Week 2022. Alongside all of that will be, and this is sort of, I guess, the big jewel in the crown of Smart Cities Council Global, is the fact that we're actually probably one of the world's largest repositories of resources around smart cities and related concepts. So what we'll be building out as part of the digital twin is knowledge resources, so blueprints, templates, tools, and they'll be shared obviously with the stakeholders that are engaged in the challenge, and then be able to support that acceleration of this idea of a marketplace. Who's involved? So we talked about 13 projects and the number of organisations. This is the cohort. Great sort of representation from Australia, but absolutely the New Zealand organisations have a seat at the table, including organisations that are not necessarily just in New Zealand, but are based in Australia and New Zealand. The cohorts in a bit more detail in terms of what they're covering. So we've actually split it all up into clusters to be able to progress the different clusters and ensure that the different clusters have access to what they need in terms of resources and engagement and support. So these are the 5 clusters. The Digital Twin Education Program will actually form part of, it's going alongside supporting the challenge participants, obviously the cohorts, but it actually would then drop into the Smart Cities Academy, and I'll mention that a little bit later on as well. But yeah, just so you're aware, there's quite a lot going on and quite a lot that we actually keen to capture. So let's sort of bring it all back. So that's who we are. Let's now bring it back to this, you know, this idea of this digital twin. And someone said to me a month or so ago, you know, we need to come up with a new name for this this concept, because people just get scared of you know, digital twin, like, whoa. But let's talk about first, like, the IoT. And I heard Mesh, Catherine from Mesh, talk about this actually at Digital Twin Week, I believe it was this year. But this idea of the Internet of Things, and I've sort of taken it back even further than what she was talking about the last 4 or 5 years, and you know, the array of things from Chicago, which was probably one of the first hyper-localized sensing projects, and at the same time actually meshed, who's a member of Smart Cities Council, started engaging with the Things Network in Australia as well. So the Things Network as a global opportunity, but they engage quite heavily with meshed in Australia. And then around the same time, or since then, GE obviously was developing out this concept of digital DNA around the Boeing engine. So that's sort of the last 4 to 5 years. But if you think about data in general, and don't call it information, but data. This whole concept of data is where we're at now, is that the Internet of Things has enabled, and a lot of other type of computation through other software and hardware has enabled, and I had to look this up just so I wanted to get the information right, the quote right. Apparently in 2021, the amount of data produced every day was 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. So that's every single day, and 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. And so where we're at is the Internet of Things, or this connectedness and this ability to transmit. The transmission part's obviously the other part. We've seen a proliferation of communication networks, so proprietary telemetry, cellular, and then we're seeing low-powered, long-range networks that are coming more ubiquitous. And then there's the Things Network, for example, as an open source network. We've also seen the cost of devices come down, and actually more sophisticated devices, and then devices being able to be used and accessed by people wanting to do research and to run pilots and to set things up a whole lot more readily than they were in the past. And then there's this idea of standards and other frameworks. And so there's this maturity. Catherine talks about the cities maturing in the sense of, what is a data framework and what is smart cities. And I know in New Zealand we're really lifting the game on capability in terms of local government and smart cities through the new partnership that we have with the Association of Local Government Information Management, meaning that all 78 councils in this country are now members of Smart Cities Council, which is a global first, so a world first, to have every single local government entity in a country in either on or embarking on or well on their way in terms of their smart cities approach. But so there's all of this sort of coming together around this concept of tech and data, and now the conversation is more recently, the conversation is also now included, what do we do about privacy and what do we do about access? And we're coming up against this interoperability, because there is so much data from so many sources and so many people have it. And it's like, well, how do we bring it together? So there's a whole pool of other challenges, although this advancement has happened. And again, digital twins, like I mentioned, it's not new. NASA did something with it in terms of the lunar module years ago. The America's Cup this year, I believe Team New Zealand had a huge advantage, because they were able to run simulations using digital twin, this concept of a digital twin, so that their team could consider different ways the whole race could play out and the different races could play out. But what I'm really talking about, though, is this concept of a digital twin plugged into the internet and data networks, and what does that look like? And so taking out that headache of all the different sources of data and cleansing the data and data lakes and storing it somewhere and accessing it. It's like, how do we really create this connected environment? And so going back to that idea of the digital twin as a capability and those pillars that I walk through, the circles. So what we need to do then to progress it, going forwards, is to support building of capability from the bottom up. So really looking at the grassroots application of something like this in terms of decision making and supporting challenges and problems in the locality, for example, and then to also in terms of, as part of that, understanding the capability, understanding rather the potential of a digital twin and what it really is and what it really isn't as well. Also realizing that not everybody has access to resources and can spend money. They don't have the staff potentially, but also to spend money on the tinkering and the piloting. And so how do we start now scaling out this ability to connect knowledge and connect what's going on, so we're not reinventing wheels? We also need to, as part of that, obviously share knowledge. So look at best practice, start developing out resources, which is one of the key focus areas of Smart Cities Council. So we're actually sharing in a way that someone can then come back to and look at. And so we do a lot of work in that space around developing out, like I said, frameworks and tools and things like that. And so that's really our bread and butter, arguably, as well as obviously connecting different entities. I was talking to somebody just this morning, and I was able to in my head sort of go through 4 or 5 individuals that I could definitely connect them through our network to have a conversation about what they were trying to do. So a real core part, I guess, is still that human to human relationship, enabling all of this to happen. And then we need to talk about, the policies and agreements that need to come into a place. An example is the work that's going on in Adelaide, where 5 councils, I think, have come together to understand how they could pool resources and collaborate around I think it's a mesh network, and leveraging that mesh network in terms of IoT and digital twins. And so that's required a conversation around cross-jurisdiction data sharing. And I know there's a similar conversation going on between what's happening in Perth and what's happening in the river part of just outside Melbourne in Victoria. And I remember those conversations 2 or 3 years ago at Smart Cities Week, and sitting down with these organisations, and the realisation in the room that Perth was doing something that the people in outside Melbourne were really interested in, and realizing that Melbourne was doing something that Perth people who were actually thinking about and weren't sure how they could make it work. But there was obviously this need to then talk about, well, what would we do? How do we engage given the boundaries between us, not just physical, but in terms of regulatory and things like that. So those sort of conversations and frameworks around that need to happen. And then we need to consider, and I'll keep saying this again and again, is that privacy and security in terms of access. Who has access? When do they have access? How long for? What can they do with it? And that, who owns the data? And from an Indigenous perspective, thinking about Indigenous data sovereignty as well as part of that, but also just thinking about it from a data sovereignty concept in general in terms of a country. So the hunger is definitely there. Catherine from Mesh, she talks about the fact that 4 years ago, Mesh started to work with 4 councils in Australia, and now they're working with 48 cities. And so that's a huge leap in that period of 4 years. And the interesting thing she says is the number of use cases that are coming out of conversations happening in councils around how, if they could get more data, what they would actually do with that data. And so that ability to start thinking about the why, really focusing on the why rather than the conversation being on just what we've got currently. So the gaps, often you'll identify gaps in terms of the data. And then just wacky concepts where we can still build on. Often a pilot or an investment happens and you sort of go, oh, we moved on from that, we'll do something different now. And there might be a write-up after it, but let's go back and leverage what has happened in the past and see how that might connect in with where we're going. So an example of that is that, and I didn't know this until I heard Catherine talk about it, is that the city of Melbourne years ago had allocated an email address to every single tree. And so Catherine was talking about how do we now leverage that to have that data collected and sent and communicated around the temperature under the tree or around the tree, the canopy condition, and so all those data points that we need to answer specific questions around to support people using those spaces, but to help develop out those spaces and just to generally plan in terms of a city. And so that was just a sort of this connection between if we could, oh yes, we can, because we did this in the past. And so don't sort of forget what you've done. It doesn't necessarily have to start from a clean slate, although I will talk about clean slate shortly in terms of it being an advantage. So, and the other piece that I'll touch on today also is quite a lot is the analytics piece. And I've already mentioned it a little bit, I'm just checking time, around analytics and modeling, but that's the real, the real chunk is coming now. Is the AI. So yeah, so that's the part. So all this data, everything that needs to happen in order to be able to generate value from that data, and then being able to engage AI to support that as well. So what we're here to talk about today is this concept of, I'm not the one that coined this term, but the urban digital twin. So this is how all this talk that I've been going on about digital twins relates to smart cities. So it's not there's a lot of projects going on. I mean, this is an example of Wellington. Singapore is doing quite a lot of stuff in this space around virtual Singapore. and I guess and I know Wellington does this really well, and there are other councils around the country that do as well, but it's just that engagement and connection with what's going on globally, so we're not having to actually reinvent wheels, and ensuring that what we're delivering though is still fit for purpose for what we want to do with it. So keeping those two sort of concepts in mind. Also remembering that there are other frameworks out there as well. So the Centre for Digital Built Britain, for example, has the Gemini principles, and then there's the ANZLIC spatially enabled digital twin concepts in Australia as well. And I know there's work going on across Australia and New Zealand around standards in that space as well. So, and what we're talking about is not sort of building the whole thing all in one go. So thinking about interoperability, yes, but also thinking about modulation, I guess you would call it, in terms of building out these concepts. And again, I was talking to somebody this morning going, don't try and boil the ocean. Think of one proof point or one sort of area that you could focus on where you could see it making an impact, and develop out this concept not as a pilot, not as a proof of concept itself, but actually deliver something that you don't then have to erase and reinvent later when you actually come up with the true solution. So always thinking with that end game in mind. And I'll talk a little bit about what New South Wales is doing in that space. And then there are the different types of digital twins, so people think about the dynamic model of an asset, with input from from current performance data around the physical version of that, but which improves situational awareness and obviously decision making, but really is focused potentially on just the short term, to actually thinking about the digital twin as a strategic planning tool. And a system to support that, where you can actually be thinking of long-term conditions and data, and yes, that connection between the physical and digital world, but actually looking at things like in Australia, their goal around net zero 2050. How do they design urban areas over the next 30 years? And so how can we start thinking long-term? And I know iwi in New Zealand talk about intergenerational. We're talking about centuries. We're not talking about decades. And so keeping that in mind as to how it can be a strategic planning tool. And again, just take what you've already got, existing data catalogs and frameworks, and think about them as part of a federated environment that enables access for analytics and research is probably a simple way of looking at it. And then again, the modeling and analytics as services, providing them as tools and resources for the different stakeholders to engage with, so that it actually does generate value and continues to generate value, because you can do more with it than a point in time solution delivered around specific problems at the time. So really taking that long-term view. I'll just keep going. It's data and analytics. So just think of those two concepts, and really thinking about research as a key component of that. One of the key reasons that we brought on the new category of membership, knowledge and research partners, so that we could actually engage as Smart Cities Council with the research community. And so we're doing that obviously already with University of Canterbury, where we co-teach or co-facilitate a paper in the smart city space, but we're also doing some other cool things with University of Canterbury in that space, and it's just going to grow from there in terms of our engagement with the research ecosystem. And it's just fundamental to bring that private public partnerships, but also engage with academia. So I'm going to run through some case studies, again, just sort of keeping track of time. This information is available at our website, but I will touch on what's happening in Liverpool, Darwin, Melbourne. Thinking about regions as a concept and a blank slate is where I want to focus that conversation, and then Canterbury and Hawke's Bay to bring it back to Aotearoa. So remembering also that things are a bit different in Australia. So two things, they've had two lots, I believe, of millions of dollars invested or made available from the government to support smart cities initiatives over the years. We have a Smart Cities Readiness Guide that actually supports cities to actually engage then with that funding opportunity and plan, strategize, and then deliver on the investment that they're wanting to make and the outcome that they're looking for. And so that's been a real useful tool for cities over there. We don't have something like that here. We have the Readiness Guide, obviously, but we need to tailor it to Aotearoa, New Zealand. But also over there, there's a new initiative that kicked off in 2016 called City Deals, which is a key initiative or an implementation tool of the federal government. And it provides a new approach for all levels of government to work together to plan and deliver transformative outcomes for Australian cities, is what it talks about. So some of the examples that I give you are actually leveraging those opportunities in Australia. And I am Australian, in case anybody's wondering. So this here is an artist's impression of the driverless vehicle between Liverpool and Western Sydney Airport, which is a new thing. Sorry about the bit of a blur. So in Liverpool, they're looking at the Liverpool City digital twin, and there are a number of partners involved, including the University of New South Wales and their Geospatial Research Innovation Development Unit, GRID. And there are other entities as well. So what we're looking at here, not in terms of the picture, but in terms of the project, is specific issues challenges that were facing Western Sydney in terms of climate extremes, cold and hot, the bushfires causing air quality issues, and then actually it being quite a key growth area for Sydney. So they're keen to see that obviously the growth happen and to take advantage of that opportunity, but what they realise is that they really need to be onto it in terms of assessing and maintaining environmental quality and looking at everything that sort of connects in with that. So, you know, transport networks and asset and infrastructure and just planning in general, green spaces, things like that. So what they started was, so Internet of Things sensing for the weather, air quality monitoring, providing dashboards to process and present data, real time being a key factor there. Most of it's temporal data that looks at indoor and outdoor environments, but also they're able to monitor the way people use the environment. So, you know, if the temperature goes a few degrees higher, what happens to the movement of people both on the footpaths around town, but also in terms of transport, and what happens in terms of using green spaces and playgrounds and parks and stuff like that, and using that then to inform planning and also to inform a response. And also just to provide better information to citizens so that they can actually be in a better position to make informed decisions about their own well-being, given the different conditions. A big barrier that they were sort of facing was the lack of spatial context in the built environment, and so that I guess that missing pieces. So the opportunity was to create a digital twin that had the ability to bring the spatial and temporal information together. So yes, it's a representation of a physical thing, but what they also were able to include was the behavioral aspects, and so they were able to really look at cause and effect, I believe, and thinking about models. And so one of the traps that often you fall into is feeling that you have to sense everything and you have to have a ton of devices out there. And there's a book out there, and I never remember it. I mention it quite often, but I never remember it. So I feel like I need to buy it, around the ugly city idea around infrastructure, especially with 5G. It's becoming a key conversation around 5G. So where do you put all this infrastructure that you suddenly need to sense the environment and send data and process things on the edge? But instead of falling into that trap, look at analytics and AI, because you can extrapolate out from the evidence base that you have and develop models. And so what we're not talking about is hundreds of sensors, but what we're talking about is advanced analytics. And so marrying up the data from sensors with analysis, so that the decision makers and the different stakeholders, including citizens, can access the information they need. And remembering again, in terms of access being the capability and ability to engage being different amongst different communities and different stakeholders, and so really factoring that in. So and we're talking about dynamic modeling, we're talking about real-time data, and so the citizens really can be empowered, I think is the key word there. So empowered decision makers can be empowered, and that tool is a digital twin, not again being a point in time solution for a specific problem, but really thinking of it as a slice and dice engagement tool with this powerful ability to generate insights at the touch of a button, you know, for lack of a better word, in response to, and even proactive in terms of the different scenarios that somebody is running or wanting to run and wanting to consider in the different circumstances. So their approach that they took here was thinking about building the digital twin and then using a standardized digital twin were two key concepts. So thinking about data integration and sensor access and storage and an initial state of visualization. And then what does access and sharing of the data digital twin look like for the different groups? And then thinking about standardization and use cases, and then the all-important management, maintenance and updating of the digital twin going forwards. The challenges they faced was around maintaining the data, analyzing the data, visualizing the data. So they sort of looked at them across those three elements. And so data integration was a challenge, especially around 3D visuals. So spatial data, it was important to consider who manages the data and has access to the data and updates, maintains and processes the data, the rules around that. And they also, going back to the digital built Britain, and some other, what's happening globally. There are the FAIR principles when it comes to data, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So that was an example in Western Sydney. Again, I'm sort of flying through these so that we have enough time for some Q&A. The interesting one about that Western Sydney idea is that it actually will fit in, slot in with this New South Wales Spatial Digital Twin initiative. And there are other initiatives underway and starting as well in New South Wales, where the realization has happened that actually it could now slot in with this framework and this spatial digital twin for New South Wales. And so that bringing together of top-down approaches and conversations with things that people are doing. Piloting is probably the wrong word. We need to get away from just piloting. We actually need to be building out and proof of concepts. We need to get away from those. We need to start focusing on delivering something that connects into a bigger picture, but also delivers that, for the stakeholder groups here in the short term. But also then can be scaled out this way as well, so vertically and horizontally. Is that right? Yeah, vertically and horizontally. So have a look at the New South Wales Spatial Digital Twin. There's loads of information online. I suggest you have a look at what they're talking about there. So Darwin did a huge project with a ton of investment, about $10 million a number of years ago, which finished in 2019. And the 5 million of it was from the federal government and 2.5 each from the Northern Territory government and the city of Darwin. So it didn't just sort of fall out of the sky, which was called Switching on Darwin. And so what they were able to do was, and they were talking about it being a world leading smart city, was having, what they ended up doing was hundreds of LED lights, hundreds of CCTV cameras, hotspots for extended free Wi-Fi, environment centers that were on all the time, smart parking sensors, audio systems in the mall, you name it, they had it. And now what they're talking about is actually how do we now leverage all of that to actually go the next step and think about a digital twin. And their focus for the digital twin is around improvement, important to sort of drive, to stimulate the economic growth and development of the region, as well as keeping sustainability in mind and well-being in mind. So there's quite a lot of areas. So they're looking at an approach where they're identifying the problems and opportunities, and being able to look at things quickly and find out what's going to happen quickly. And so prediction comes into it. So again, that analytics. They want to have a look at, the ability to look at the data from a street level perspective, and have a look to ensure that it's actually correct data at that level as well, so which can be a bit tricky. And then empowerment, so empowering that community so that we can actually put this tool into the hands of the community, but also other stakeholders, councillors, council themselves. So thinking about smart council, to be able to gain those insights and be able to measure and evaluate effectively in terms of a response, and actually being proactive as well when you think about that concept of prediction. So the hypothesis that they talk about is that the digital twin can enable the city of Darwin to predict impact before investments are made. And so that's what they're really looking at doing. Melbourne, Darwin's got a population of about 100,000 people, but it's got $10 billion, I think, dollars of GDP. So very different scenario to Melbourne. So Melbourne's new vision is actually, and I love it, city of possibility, where the world meets and the extraordinary happens. And so they've got 6 strategic priorities, 15 aspirations, and 52 major initiatives underway. And their focus is really about an intuitive city. And a number of years ago, I spoke about this idea of the city being software. Just like now, we've got infrastructure and assets that sort of just are there and they enable things to happen. It's like the smart city being just this fabric of a place and being able to be intuitive and to support, whatever we want to be doing in that place. And so that's sort of what the place looks like. And a city that responds, but even more than that, a city that actually is proactive in terms, so it's not reactive. Arguably, I don't think many would fail at arguing with this, but the data lens has been accelerated by COVID. So, we were able to, I know in Hamilton, have a look at activity on footpaths during COVID, have a look at transport movements, and be able to then support the community around, our response to COVID and mitigating risk. Again, the analytics is the superpower when it comes to doing something with data. So situational awareness is one thing, but the real benefit is actually that predictive analysis and modeling and you know, what could happen, and being able to do that in a simulated scenario that is spot on what would happen in the real world. And so that's where Melbourne is looking at sort of taking the work that they're doing. So you know, I can give you a number of examples of what they're doing, but have a look at the website. So their approach has been around pilots, but it actually has been co-creating with the citizens and thinking about trust and transparency. So one of the apps, for example, just to focus on that trust and transparency element, they created this app so that they put sensors into this into a park, you know, and so they had sensors around the movement of people there, and when they were coming and when they weren't there, whether they were using the benches. I think it was around a bench. And so people started thinking they're trying to get rid of the homeless, you know, and that's why they're measuring, you know, what is this usage of this bench. And so what they quickly realized was that they needed to make that data available to the public, so the public could see what they were seeing, and they could see the data that's being pulled together from the different sensors, and the power of having that sort of information at your fingertips. And so now you can actually download the app, which isn't actually used quite a lot, because I think this whole idea in terms of citizen engagement and the citizens benefiting needs to really take off still. But when they initially ran some tours, there was a lot of engagement from the public. And so they're able to visualize what's being collected and the why, and actually think about the why from their own perspective. So, and then they can sort of go in that scenario, if we put in an additional bench, this potentially might be what happened. If we want to change the servicing, for example, of emptying the bins or cleaning the barbecues, what would happen if we changed it this way? And so they're able to simulate a number of scenarios in order to be able to better offer services and manage the city. And they also learned things that they didn't realize they would have learned as to what parts of the park are actually cooler at different times of the day, depending on the type of tree or depending on where the sun was. And so they've really dipped their toes in the power of this connection of the physical and the digital world with data, but the two-way connection and the ability to not have to sense the environment completely and be able to model and extrapolate out, and actually ensuring that those models that are explainable is a key element of AI. So being able to ensure the models are robust, ethical, and explainable. Probably, I definitely need to, if I'm talking about AI, I need to actually mention that. And so, yeah, and you'll find then that the use cases then are a whole lot more varied. And so don't just focus on the data that you have and trying to visualize it and saying that's your digital twin. You really need to go back to the why, and don't try and boil the ocean all in one go. In terms of the regions, I do want to mention here that we talked about cities there, and we talked about Australian cities, but you know, in terms of regions, I feel that there's an opportunity there in the same way that the developing world was an opportunity for smart cities, and they've leapfrogged the developed world. And you can actually Google that, leapfrogging the developed world and smart cities. But you know, the infrastructure isn't there for basic internet access, and so there's this ability, I guess it's a clean slate to just start and actually not be bogged down with the data that we already have and needing to do something with it to generate value, or assets and infrastructure that we already have. You know, that whole concept of retrofitting just goes out the window. So you can really focus on what you want to be doing. So people because of COVID, and probably before that, a lot of people were going down the same road, was, you know, they want to live in those rural settings and those regional settings, but they want some of the perks of the city. And so how do you do both? And so those areas are just going to grow. And so this is an ability to actually think about, you know, to plan that growth and to really model different scenarios and design a space for future needs. And really leveraging IoT and the digital twin, as, you know, IoT is part of a digital twin and AI is part of a digital twin, in order to do that. And so so the councils obviously would be interested from an economic, the economic development agents will be interested from an economic growth perspective, and then there's the well-being and just from a general investment perspective and operational perspective from a council. So they really do present an opportunity. Now bringing it back to Aotearoa. So here's an example in Hastings where, you know, I don't think you could do a digital twin presentation without looking at something physical that was just a building or an asset. So in this case, Hastings District Council were looking at the Toi Toi project, and again, you can Google this, which was an opera house, a heritage listed building, and so they leveraged BIM models and asset IDs and you know, created the model with asset IDs and registered data, and then created this GIS dashboard as a fully editable model of this building. And then they leveraged that in order to be able to plan what was going to happen with it and the design. And I guess it's a more traditional application of digital twin. And I want to get away from thinking of digital twin as just that. But where it gets really clever is how it started to move more towards being around a smart city. And so it was used as a public engagement tool where people could actually link it with the tickets that were available. And so where was the seating exactly? And they could visualize the seating. It was supporting the scheduling and planning of maintenance, which could be planned around, when the theatre was being used. Environmental sensors enabled the optimization of all the the energy consumption around heating and cooling, and the costs associated with that. And then if you sort of pull out from there and go, what's going on around it? So what else are the points of interest around that space, and then what are the transport routes to get there? What are the food outlets that are around there? And obviously in New Zealand there are a number of other examples as well of other councils doing cool things. Wellington City Council, like you saw, Auckland Transport, Kiwi Rail's doing a huge project with other partners in terms of the transport space. DHB's in Auckland and Dunedin doing some cool things. Crown Research Institutes and the universities, as I said, are doing some cool things in the digital twin space. This is a cool pilot. I was hoping to be able to talk about it a little bit, but you can find information on, otherwise get in touch with me. But this is a really cool pilot in Canterbury around the use of digital twin for flood resilience, and actually building out a solution that will support better management and mitigation around flooding. And so there's a sort of regional application of digital twin. I'm just going to, and this one actually is funded by the Building Innovation Partnership and Frontier SI, who are a member of Smart Cities Council, and they do a number of pilots in Australia as well. So the how, this is what you need to be thinking. But before you even go down that road, you really need to be getting some capability in around what's going on globally and nationally. A bit of education in terms of that, in terms of the digital twin space, and so and engaging with as many other conversations as you can that are going on around this. And so and another important element is that you can't just buy a digital twin. It's about, and Veris talks about this. It's a shared data, policies, digital workflows, algorithms, and collaboration that enables the real and digital worlds to interact. You can't just buy your digital twin. If you're keen, just wrapping up, if you're keen to sort of stay engaged with what we're doing in the digital twin space, just sort of building off of the need to, stay connected, there's some cool things that are going on regularly with the digital twin meets. And so we've got them scheduled every month. Digital twin TV is where we actually then put the recordings afterwards, and you can find all this at the Digital Twin Hub. The other things that we do, have a look on the smartcitiescouncil.com website, and there are some other websites here, but the Academy to build capability, the Centre for Data Leadership, which the Digital Twin Hub is part of. We've launched the Data Leadership Influencers 50, so you might be interested in that. The Future of Place, and Smart Cities Chronicles is our podcast, so definitely have a listen. Our 89th episode just dropped recently. And what else is going on in 2021? This is there's a New Zealand Digital Twin Summit planned for 7th of July. And then there are the Centre for Data Leadership, data dialogues that are happening on a regular basis. And that is me. So that was quite a lot. We're also involved with the national conversations around the National Digital Twin for Infrastructure and a Centre for Digital Engineering for New Zealand as well. And if you want to find out anything more about what I talked about, look at the website or get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Look, that was a jam-packed 50-minute presentation. And everyone, I do apologise that we've run out of time for questions, but I think please feel free to email. If you do have anything, email them to Emily. We will get them to Janet and get them back to you. We will share the presentation, I believe. Look, it certainly feels like, especially the Internet of Things has grown so much in the last couple of years, and this will be a massive field moving forward. And it's really impressive, especially what you said about the New Zealand councils being invested. Yeah, and look, I feel like we've only really seen the tip of the iceberg. Even that, my head's swimming with the amount of information that you have just passed on. I do hope that everybody really enjoyed it. Janet, thank you for your time and for presenting to our members. And Emily, thank you for organising it. Please, those who are still online, do feel free to email if you do have any questions, but I think it's best to let everybody go because we have just hit 11 o'clock.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.